Great. So wonderful. So for those of you who I don't know, my name is Mike Evans, and I'm the interim director of the Zilka Center for Environmental Initiatives here at Williams College. It's essentially our campus sustainability office. And we have been, as you all have been, thinking about our sustainable food standards. And since 2012, when we first started, before my time, when we first started thinking about the Real Food Challenge and students pushed for that, the college decided not to sign on to those. But since then, we have been using those criteria and using the Real Food Calculator. We are now in this moment of doing college-wide strategic planning and thinking again about how do we sign on to standards that will help the institution around sustainability. So this call, the impetus for this webinar came from a discussion on the NECSC listserv, and I'd asked about the Cool Food Pledge, and lots of you wrote back suggesting other certifications to check out and saying that you were interested in having a discussion. So I thought it would be worthwhile to have a webinar, and I followed up with the folks who had emailed me, and lots of people were willing to share their ideas. And so we have a great group of presenters today. The variety of the presenters is intentional. We have some self-ops and some that are contract managed. We have some small institutions and some larger ones. I hope you enjoy, and I look forward to those of you who aren't presenting to hear your perspectives and experiences in the second half of the webinar. So just a bit about structure. We have 5 schools presenting about 6 different standards and programs. Mostly we're presenting in pairs, although every once in a while there's just a solo person taking it, representing. Each section will have people present for 3 to 5 minutes. Feel free to add in questions into the chat in the upper right-hand corner. And if we have time, we will, Caroline, our assistant director, will share some of those questions and ask the presenters to respond. If we don't have time for those in those 5 minutes, we'll bring up those questions at the end. And again, at the end, we hope to hear from other folks in our discussion. Just a little bit more housekeeping. So we also have Corey Campbell here from our OIT office, who's providing tech support. So thank you, Corey, and thank you, Caroline, for your help. And again, just a reminder, please mute on your end. Make sure your volume is all the way up, and we're recording this webinar. Are there any questions at this point? Nothing in the chat. All right, great. So here are the programs that we will be exploring today. And here are presenters. I'm going to give introductions for everyone. First, Allison Tjaden is the Assistant Director for New Initiatives in the Department of Dining Services at the University of Maryland. She spearheads projects that help connect Terps with their food, such as the Terp Farm, Farmers Market at Maryland, and UMD Campus Pantry. Allison received her Master's of Public Health degree from the University of Maryland School of Public Health with a focus on environmental health, and her BA from the University of Virginia. And as you can see, she'll be discussing menus of change and the Cool Food Pledge. Next, Andy Cox. Andy is the Director of Dining Services at Smith College in Northampton, Mass. He's a member of the Farm to Institution New England Network Advisory Committee, that's FINE, and is on FINE's Farm NC to Campus Network Steering Committee. Through his roles in regional tracking and evaluating working groups, he aims to leverage institutional purchases to rebuild the regional food system amidst an increasingly volatile global supply chain. Andy will be talking about Real Food Challenge and Food Solutions New England 50 by 60 vision. Next, David Havelick. David is a sustainability manager in Harvard's Office for Sustainability. He works with faculty, students, staff, and senior leaders to translate cutting-edge research into practice and to ensure that research informs the priorities of the office and the university. An example of this was his work with faculty, students, and staff to create Harvard's sustainable and healthful food standards. David will be talking about good food purchasing and Cool Food Pledge. Next, Julianne Stelmaszyk. Julie is the manager of regional and sustainable food systems at BC Dining, where she oversees sustainability initiatives and regional sourcing strategies. Her role supports procurement and culinary teams in bringing more regionally and sustainably grown foods on the menus, while also working to increase awareness around regional food systems among students, staff, and faculty. Prior to working at BC, Julie worked as a vegetable farmer in the Boston area and culinary instructor in Italy. After completing a culinary apprenticeship at the Rome Sustainable Food Project, she founded a farm-to-table cooking school and established a food, gardens, and sustainability program at a boarding school in Rome. Julie will be talking about menus of change and AASHE STARS food and beverage standard. And then Marissa Watson. Marissa is the sustainability manager for Sodexo at University of Vermont Dining, working with regional partners to improve the local food supply chain while working with students to reduce waste on campus. After a career working for National Geographic Television, Marissa became interested in food systems and received her master's in agricultural economics from the University of Georgia. She has worked in production as an organic farmer for 5 years, and then in technical assistance at the school food programs as the school food programs coordinator K through 12 for the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. Marissa will be talking about Real Food Challenge. Great. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andy and Marissa to talk about the Real Food Challenge. You guys can unmute yourselves and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I'll go through what the Real Food Challenge does, and then Andy will be presenting a little bit about how it manifests itself at Smith as well. But the overall goal of the Real Food Challenge, which is a national student-led movement, is to shift $1 billion of existing university food budgets away from industrial farms towards 4 categories of purchasing. They're listed at the bottom of the screen there. So the first is local and community-based, the second is fair, the third is humane, and the fourth is ecologically sound. The benefits to the Real Food Standard are that as a student-led movement, it has encouraged discourse about transparent food systems. So at the University of Vermont, it has given students an outlet to work directly with us at Sodexo to determine purchasing shifts that fall into these 4 categories. It also gives our chefs here at Sodexo a clear directive when making purchasing shifts. So items either count as real or they don't count based on certain third-party certifications. And then that specificity helps with long-term expectations in purchasing shifts. So you can go to the next slide. There are a few challenges with this. Did a little pun there for you, some real food challenges. First, want to acknowledge that no metric is perfect, and that Real Food has given students the tools to discuss food values in order to debate what is good for nutrition, social justice, and environmental health. That said, at Sodexo in Vermont, we also have a tracking system called the Vermont First Pledge, where we have committed to purchasing Vermont products before we look outside of the state. Our definition of local for that program is Vermont plus 30 miles, which is at odds with the Real Food definition, which specifies a dollar amount that a company must stay within. And it does end up equating big with bad. That said, we serve 27,000 meals a day in the state of Vermont. We serve 12,000 meals a day here at UVM. And so we do run at volume. We also work within our state to ensure that as the largest restaurant in the state, we're doing well by our community. And so we're also working within Farm to Plate, which is our statewide strategic purchasing plan, and then the 50 by 60 plan, which Andy will speak to in a little bit. Those plans are not always at odds with Real Foods, but those 2 initiatives are starting to drive more of our work than Real Food is, because we have made that commitment to our community. And then finally, certifications can be a bit of an issue. Again, just recognizing that no one metric is perfect. So Real Food Challenge changed their standards during the summer of 2019, and this compromised purchasing shifts that had already occurred. For instance, eggs, as far as I understand, the current egg certification being recognized, which is certified humane pasture raised, does not have a vendor in the supply chain that operates at scale. We serve roughly 150 dozen eggs per day on campus. And so that sourcing has become an issue for us. We do purchase certified humane cage free, but it no longer counts for Real Food. And that was a big shift that we had already made. And then finally, the MSC certification requires that the institute be certified as well as the product. And then Gulf of Maine Research Institute, which is a certification that we try to purchase within here in Vermont, is not recognized by Real Food. So those are just a few examples of the challenges. Andy, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was going to add a little bit about how the tracking manifests on many campuses. So the auditing has to be done by students. So training new students every year or every semester can be a real challenge. Hopefully you get somebody returning, willing to do it again. And in many places, it isn't a funded or accredited position. So the workload is pretty significant for very little return. And because of that, a lot of schools will take the option that RFC has to track 2 sample months to get a representative purchasing percentage. So I know we do October and February, so one in the harvest season of New England, one definitely outside. And many schools do that. But increasingly, we're buying in-season and processing and or storing more to try and take advantage of the local product. So none of that is counting if we don't buy it in October or February. And that sort of hurts our numbers as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. The way that this has manifested at UVM, and I included a link in the slide deck to the Real Food Impact Report, is that it has allowed us to make great partnerships. I've listed 4 of the companies that are highlighted in the Real Food Impact Report up there. And so it has driven some purchasing shifts, and that is a positive of the campaign. Andy, do you want to present yours?
Yeah, so I think another one of the positive educational pieces for students is having the discussions about which criteria matter most. And as you can see, we actually dropped in ecologically sound after my first year tracking this because we were spending so much on this perception of organic being best that I said I can have a much better impact across the other criteria if we were to stop buying singly organic products. We really focused on local and community-based so that you don't necessarily need a third-party certification. If you know the farmer and they're using organic practices without certification, or a member of NOFA here in New England, Northeast Organic Farming Association, that doesn't count as an organic certification, and neither does somebody with integrated pest management. So we have a farm who's actually reduced their pesticides working with UMass Ag Extension by 2/3. So like we want to give credit to those sort of farms that are doing the right things and don't necessarily want a third-party certification. Same thing with their labor practices and their treatment of animals. So we focused on local and community-based. We felt that there was a lot of students on campus who felt that strongly about humane. So you'll see a significant increase. We were buying none when I got here in 2015. So we have focused a little bit more on the meat that we aren't getting locally, trying to buy that humane. Again, we're still only at about 5%.
Great, thank you all.
Hi there, Allison, Tjaden. Mike, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that, Allison. I was muted myself. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to menus of change with Allison and Julie. Take it away. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. So the Menus of Change initiative is really been an exciting opportunity for us to work not just across the college and university sector, but across all food systems. So it's been a really amazing opportunity for me to network with folks, and so happy to share it here. The Menus of Change initiative was developed by the Culinary Institute of America and the Harvard School of Public Health to work across food system actors to advance healthy and sustainable diets, realizing that to be healthy and sustainable, they first have to be delicious. And so what you see on the screen is the 24 principles of the Menus of Change that were developed based on the research done from many of the partners of the Menus of Change. And this is a busy slide with a lot of information, so I'm sure I definitely recommend folks taking a look at a lot of the resource details on the Menus of Change website to see more about each of the individual principles and the annual reports that the Culinary Institute of America puts out every year to show how this effort has been advancing across and where there are gains across all of these particular areas. Mike, can you move to the next slide? It was interesting. 2012, the Menus of Change initiative got started, and in 2014, it became clear that colleges and universities are really a unique space where food and food systems happen. Not only are colleges and universities places that offer food service, but they also have the research and academics and places of learning. And so a group of universities led by the Culinary Institute of America and Stanford developed a subgroup from the Menus of Change called the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative to bring those university actors together, realizing that there are really unique opportunities on college and university campuses, as well as some additional partner areas to further accelerate the principles of the Menus of Change, because they're places of both research and food service. And so I think these days there are over 60 university partners as a part of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, and a lot of the work is about exchanging best practices and looking to ramp up the work through both the professional network groups through the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative and different types of sub-work groups to advance both research as well as outreach and education are two really big focus areas. Thinking of an example of a research project could take place on one university and then be replicated across many of the university partners through the collaborative. So thinking about the incredible impact of turning our food service facilities at colleges and universities into living laboratories. Mike, could you go to the next slide? The way that has happened at the University of Maryland, we participated in the Menus of Change Leadership Summit starting in 2016 in Hyde Park to exchange ideas through the Menus of Change, and then joined the collaborative in 2018. We began participating in a collective impact data collection through the Menus of Change to track protein purchases specifically to see if there's a way to better understand the impacts of that over time. And then just this year, we joined the Fellows Program. A lot of our work with the Menus of Change is very focused on student projects and engaging our staff across those 24 principles. Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'll just speak a little bit about what Menus of Change looks like for us at Boston College. We joined the collaborative in 2014, which I think is the year that the collaborative was launched. And the great thing about our participation is we have members in every single committee that you can have a member in MCRC. So we have this our director, faculty representative, our VP is on the senior administrative committee, the chefs committee, executive chefs committee, sustainability and nutrition. So it's been this really great space to collaborate across departments in a way that we weren't really doing before. I am co-chair with Maureen Timmons from Northeastern of the Education Working Group, where we started a fellowship program that Allison mentioned last year. So we also participate in this, and it's a great way to really engage students with the menus of change principles. Up until recently, a lot of the members, the 60 members now, I think, were using it more kind of back of house or to inform menus, which is definitely the purpose, but we weren't engaging students in kind of that food literacy piece. And so what you can see on the slide here on the bottom right is really tiny, but essentially it's just a research study that 2 seniors did last year that were fellows of ours, and they did an analysis with their environmental science professor on the carbon footprint of top dining meals. So this is just a cool example of how we've been able to use the MCRC Fellows program to kind of help us to advance our healthy and sustainability goals. We also participate in the collective impact study. That's been fantastic. I think it really helped us benchmark against kind of other schools that are members of the MCRC collaborative. It's also helped us internally to kind of know areas that we're weaker in and areas that we're maybe performing better in than we had realized. And it's also great. I know that we'll later talk about the Cool Food Pledge, but we don't have to do the equivalency emissions. The World Resources Institute does that, which is great. So it's kind of standardized, and they're a strategic, I think they're a research collaborator with MCRC. In terms of how we use the principles at BC, we initially were putting them kind of out in the dining halls and promoting them, but it was a little bit too much for students to handle. So we've actually kind of embedded them in that little graphic on the left there in our 5 main food standards, which is this fresh to table program, fair trade, regional, equitable, sustainable, healthy. And we've kind of found that they fit nicely kind of as action items within these 5 principles that we use. And I put the main benefits here. For us, it's been amazing to collaborate with other schools and use that kind of as a benchmarking tool, but also just on campus for us to across departments connect. It's also given us access to top trends in research every year at the annual meeting. I think Data Essential does some great presentations on kind of industry trends in health and sustainability at higher ed. And it's also been great for us to use with our culinary team to engage on specific things like, serve less red meat less often, or more kinds of seafood more often. So we've been using it kind of more in that space.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to move on to the Good Food Purchasing Program, and David will be speaking about that.
Hi there. Yeah, and this is perfect that this came right after the Menus of Change talk, because our 2 major vendors on Harvard's campus are also part of Menus of Change and the University Research Collaborative. So a lot of that work is all connected to what I'll talk about as well right now. So the Good Food Purchasing Program is a program for public institutions that launched in Los Angeles in 2012. And this is, so it's not necessarily set up for colleges and universities. Until now, most of their partners have been K through 12 school systems and cities. So just last year, for instance, Boston's City Council approved that Boston will be part of this Good Food Purchasing Program. The program is set up in some ways very similar to the Real Food Challenge, in the sense that there's reporting requirements and a point system. It's pretty flexible though, and institutions can decide which of the 5 categories they want to focus on. So there's animal welfare, nutrition, valued workforce, environmental sustainability, and local economies. And as Harvard was developing its own sustainable healthful food standards a couple of years ago, we really wanted a holistic framework to think of our food system. And we needed food standards because at Harvard we have multiple food vendors on campus, major food vendors running entire cafeterias for schools. So we couldn't just work with one food vendor, we had to work with multiple. So we were looking for this holistic look at the food system and how we could start to track metrics that mattered. And so we put together a multidisciplinary faculty committee and came up with a first draft of food standards. And you'll see the 6 categories there that we settled on. And that's when we were made aware of the Good Food Purchasing Program and engaged with them to find out what reporting they had in their categories. And as you can see, our categories are very similar to theirs. And so we were able to, with our draft of the reporting, kind of start to align it with some of the way they frame their questions and things like that. And in our minds, we're really trying to set up our vendors on campus to be in a good position in the next couple of years to be able to report into the Good Food Purchasing Program if and when it can expand to kind of the university and college ecosystem. So I think what's really exciting about the Good Food Purchasing Program, and you can write to them and ask to see some of their reporting documents and things like that, is it is this really it's a lot of work to collect the data. So we weren't ready to ask our food vendors to be contributing to it at this point. But you can kind of ramp up the reporting requirements on your own campus and align it to their priorities and their reporting. Also, like the Real Food Challenge, they do rely a lot on third-party certifications. And as we heard earlier, there's no perfect metric. And so the flexibility that the Good Food Purchasing Program allows is pretty exciting. Also, so one kind of interesting point is now that our city, Boston, signed on to the Good Food Purchasing Program, people like me and others in Boston are on the advisory coalition for that implementation. So we as an institution can learn from a city implementing it in their space, and we can kind of be more prepared to join in later.
Great, thank you so much, David. All right, moving right along. Julie will be speaking to us about AASHE Stars food and beverage purchasing.
Yes, hello again. So, AASHE, I'm gonna say just upfront that we have not successfully submitted the food and beverage purchasing report for AASHE because the previous version 2.1 was difficult. So that's just kind of to be upfront about that. We are hoping to submit soon, and so I wanted to share kind of the pros and cons of AASHE. Some of you may already know about AASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Ed. STARS is another acronym that is, I think, in that little gold emblem there, and that's their reporting model. And it's a self-reporter. I think that's the main one that we do is the self-reporting. So it's similar to these kind of other reports. And the good thing about the new version that I'll talk about is that a lot of the same data and metrics now feed into this where it hadn't before. So a couple of things about AASHE Stars. It's campus-wide. And so food and beverage purchasing is one of the categories that sits within it, but there's transportation, energy, academics, culture, equity. There's all these different components to the AASHE Stars reporting. So I would say one of the really cool opportunities about Stars is that it forces the campus to work together to advance sustainability. And so sometimes it often brings together departments that maybe hadn't worked together before. It also is an opportunity to showcase what dining might be doing that the rest of the campus might not know about. If they're so focused on energy and transportation, there's 6 points that you can earn for Stars for food and beverage specifically, which is actually a pretty good chunk of the total points that you can receive. Some of the categories are only a 0.5 point or 1 point. So it makes sense that food and beverage is a big part of it. So campus-wide, it's an international organization, so it's also gets the schools recognized at a wider level. Although I would say I think most of the participants are US-based. It's a voluntary submission that you do every few years, and it's kind of up to the institution how often they want to submit. So we kind of missed our window last year, and we're hoping to get our data together so that we can kind of offer that to the institute, to BC, to the committee, the AASHE committee, to submit again and hopefully get maybe move from silver to gold. I would say the benefit of this new 2.2 version that just came out last April, so people are starting to use this as a new metric this year. The benefits is that they've simplified it. So it was really hard to get some of the criteria that they required before, which essentially asked like how much revenue your food producers, your food vendors made. And that was really hard information that we weren't able to get. And we weren't really tracking kind of like the revenue of our food producers. We were looking at other kind of things that have been mentioned before, right, around animal welfare and sustainability. So it does look at food spend. The new criteria looks at these third-party certifications, sustainable or ethical, and they have a whole list of what that means. You can also kind of self-verify, but you have to really explain what that means. They also look at short supply chain, which I think means one middleman, and then plant-based. And the cool thing about the new plant-based criteria is that it's aligned with the Cool Food Pledge and the Menus of Change collective impact that we mentioned before. So it's all the same data. So finally, it seems like these organizations are starting to talk to each other and realize that we can't keep changing our kind of dashboard every few years. So I would say I think they did a great job of kind of aligning Menus of Change with the new STARS criteria. I have some of the pros here. It's really well known. One of the benefits is that the ratings feed into the Princeton Review. So that's something that a lot of schools care about. And as I said, the plant-based criteria now is the same as these kind of other metrics. Some of the cons is it can be really time consuming if you don't already have it set up to measure those things. And the criteria, like they move the goalpost every few years. So you might think you get a gold and then they kind of push it further.
Great, Julie. Thanks so much.
Sure.
So now we're bringing up people you've seen and heard from before. So David and Allison will be talking about the Cool Food Pledge.
Hi again, everybody. So the Cool Food Pledge, you already heard a little bit, is a pledge to slash our food-related greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2030. It is administered by the World Resources Institute, but is an initiative of many of the organizations you can see on the bottom of the screen, from the UN Environment Group to Healthcare Without Harm and the EAT Commission. So a lot of really great minds going into how to really quantify a lot of these efforts in reducing our environmental impact through the food that we eat. The Cool Food Pledge is a program that any organization that serves food can sign on to. So it includes universities and colleges, hospitals, cities, businesses, taking that collective impact together. And so that is also great to see folks from IKEA and other companies participating alongside universities as well as hospitals. So a really diverse group of institutions that serve food, all making that same commitment. Mike, will you turn the slide? So for us at the University of Maryland, I already mentioned that we've been involved in the Menus of Change and the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, and thinking a lot about those 24 principles that Julie and I shared with you a little bit earlier in the call. And one of the things that we kept coming back to was this idea of having an overarching metric that we could use, similar to what we had been using for our goal for 2020, inspired by the Real Food Challenge. Our sustainable food commitment was 20% sustainable food purchasing by 2020, really looking at what's ahead for us as it relates to sustainability and food on campus, and how do we really quantify those 24 principles from the Menus of Change in a way that would resonate with our students. And our students on campus, as many of you probably can relate to, are very passionate about climate action, and our campus has already taken a lot of strides in our climate action plan and our President's climate commitment. And so thinking about our efforts for sustainability as it relates to food in those terms was very captivating for us. And so we had already been collecting some of the information through the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative's Collective Impact study, which measures certain food purchasing in pounds and then equates that to greenhouse gas emissions. And so when we learned about the World Resources Institute's effort to bring forward the Cool Food Pledge, we felt like it was a natural fit as an important goal and statement for us to be making. that we are looking not just to measure these things, but really to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the food that we buy. So this August, the University of Maryland was the first university signatory of the pledge, and this year has really been a focus for us in engaging our community on campus in what that's going to mean for us in the 10 years ahead. And so we've conducted a baseline assessment with the World Resources Institute, and we've engaged and gotten an outpouring of support from students who are really interested in getting involved in a hands-on way. So we have environmental science and policy students who are working. This is actually the second semester that we've been the clients for a capstone semester-long project. We also worked with fellows from a UMD Global Stewards program who are interdisciplinary PhD students interested in water, energy, and food, as well as our dietetic interns and some interdisciplinary business classes through the Quest program to really figure out how we ramp up. Part of the recommendations from the students was to launch a steering committee, which we did, and we'll be working with those student projects to publish our strategic plan at the end of this year over the summer after we've heard from the student projects that we've been working with. The great thing that we've enjoyed working with the Cool Food Pledge is just the amount of support that we've been getting from the World Resources Institute. They have compiled an incredible body of knowledge about these ideas, both the technical expertise, as Julie mentioned, on how to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, but also the behavior change and marketing, all different types of facets. They actually publish a wonderful resource called the Strategic Playbook, and will work with signatories of the pledge to help you evaluate your operations and give you specific ideas and examples of things that are evidence-based that are going to work to meet these goals. So they've been an incredible partner to work on this program. And I'll turn it over to Harvard.
Yeah, so this is David again. And I think very similar to the University of Maryland, we were already kind of in a pretty good position to sign on to this pledge last September because we, as part of our sustainable healthful food standards, but also because of the work of some of our major vendors as part of that collective action, collective impact program that was part of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, our vendors were in a really good place to start reporting into a pledge like this, how much red meat, how much poultry, et cetera. Whereas maybe 3-4 years ago, our vendors were saying that was going to be tough, but we ramped up. And so this pledge was kind of perfect timing for us to sign on to last September. I think I did want to say some of maybe they're not challenges, but some things to note is the data piece is something that we're still working through. We want to make sure that we collect the data here at Harvard in a way that we can collect it exactly the same way year over year. So that we're still working out some of those things. But, same thing with the University of Maryland, it's really exciting to be a part of this group where we can share best practices and check in with other signatories to kind of improve that over time. Now, by signing on to the pledge, it's not as easy as just signing on to the pledge. There is a cost to it. That's why World Resources Institute is able to provide a lot of these resources. So that's just something to be aware of. But the pros of this are numerous. So one exciting thing that made it more possible for Harvard to sign on to something like this is that you as an institution are not necessarily tied to meeting the goal of the reduction. It's that it's this group goal. So we all have an interest in helping each other meet this group goal of reducing our emissions related to food. Another pro, of course, is as has been mentioned, is there's this now one calculator for converting food to emissions, and so we don't have this problem where one person runs them with one calculator and another person runs it with a different, and they come up with different results. So that's been helpful. And then all these countless resources that the World Resources Institute is sharing with our vendors makes them feel like it was a good trade-off, that even though it's been some extra work to put this data together, they're now benefiting from these resources that are research-based and are going to help them meet this goal. The other thing that's been exciting on Harvard's campus is this definitely allowed people to rally behind this because it's part of this global goal. So people feel much more tied to it because it's a very specific goal. It's global, and there's not just universities and colleges as part of it. As was mentioned, IKEA, different cities, Bloomberg, lots of companies are signing onto this as well. So that made it much more possible for Harvard. At a very high level, our executive vice president signed the pledge on behalf of the university. And then one just last thing you could see on the right, that this pledge has already inspired at Harvard is a lot of students, faculty, and staff are creating tools that others can use on campus. So some students and faculty came together with our office to create a sustainable meeting and event guide that's available on our website that really pushes people to choose more plant-forward menus and things like that. We're also university-wide in various places going to be implementing this default veg concept for large events, and for also in our cafeterias, making it so the default is more plant-based and people can request animal products. And so it just swaps the default. And it's, but again, because it's part of this cool food pledge, people are really inspired. And then also an undergrad created this guide to plant-based diets at Harvard that featured some athletes who have plant-based diets and did some myth busting and things like that. And again, it wasn't just that it was a peer-to-peer educational moment, but it was also helping the institution reach this goal that we've set, which was very exciting.
Thank you, David and Allison. And our last program, Andy will be talking about Food Solutions New England 50 by 60.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I threw this one on. It's not really a certification. It is a roadmap for New England to produce half of its own food by 2060. And I've used it to sort of frame the menus we do on campus, much like you would for menus of change or default veg. And it shows on the next slide, if you want to go to it, there's a really long report that I recommend anybody interested take a look at. It's really fascinating. And it talks mostly about like resiliency in our region, which if you have a fairly apocalyptic view of the future like me, you're nervous about global supply chains. And I'd rather be the one buying from the local farm first when supplies run low. So I know that, the transportation is a relatively small part of the general food footprint. But again, there's a lot of less need for third-party certifications when you're buying locally. So just to sort of caveat why I'm focusing on this. But it too says, meat is bad. So if you look at the sort of omnivore's delight, it's sort of what we're striving for now, and that is a sort of 24% animal protein. So right now we're at 30. When I started looking at this framework, we were at 35% animal products on campus. We had one vegan dining hall. It was getting crowded, so we added a second and then added vegan options again, sort of as the default at 2 other locations. So now, and we run 15, so it's we have too many to choose from. But now 4 of them can reliably have a vegan option spread across campus. And we've been able to reduce our total down to 32% over the last 3 years. So 3% of our purchasing has been shifted away from animal products. And at the same time, we're buying less meat, but better meat. So really, when you're comparing dollars, a 3% decrease in animal products is actually significantly higher. But again, as many of you all know, getting data from food vendors is a challenge. So I haven't been able to reliably say how many fewer pounds of animal products we're buying, but that's my sort of next goal. So in this scenario, though, we need to get down even less, right? So like they're looking at 18%, and that's sort of the goal. About 20% of your diet, animal products, and a lot more plants and grains and beans, things that we should be growing here in New England. Again, this doesn't equate for 100% of the diet. We're not taking coffee and banana and chocolate away from anybody. So it isn't as controversial as some other campuses, like Hampshire College down the road said they were going to be 100% local. So, it's not that provocative. We're not taking away meat. We're sort of just saying half of the food should be benefiting our region. And there's a lot of economic reasons around that too. We use the economic multiplier of 2.4 times for any dollar spent in the region, that dollar will then get spent by a local merchant again, or spent on labor locally. So we try to make that argument. And so I actually went back and looked at our consumer price index, compared after we hit our real food challenge number of 20%. And my food cost on sort of my largest 50 items only went up in the year that it was like 1.2% CPI for food. Ours only went up 0.6. So there's like an economic argument to be made about why buying local doesn't subject you to global food fluctuations. So I just decided I'd throw this in here. It's also helped with sort of the Kendall Foundation as well. We submitted a grant to get, or a proposal to get a grant on meat purchasing. So we're buying a lot more whole animals. I know Harvard and UVM and BC on here all got prizes as well. But one of the feedback the Kendall Foundation got was that they shouldn't be supporting meat in a future food system. But if you look, like even this proposal, which for full disclosure, Kendall Foundation also funds Food Solutions New England and Farm to Institution New England. So I'm not really an advocate for them, but even in a future state, like we can still support some meat, and it was still only 20% of the full prizes they gave out focused on meat anyway. So I was able to help them craft that message that like, we don't need to totally eliminate meat from our diet, but we should be buying a lot less and a lot better, and the way it's produced matters. So yeah, so here's sort of my drop in meat purchases. Fortunately, a lot of it went to produce and not necessarily frozen products. We did increase on some of them. So, we went up on beef. Again, this is dollars spent, so it's kind of hard to really say how much more of something we bought or less. And then the next slide, okay, one more. Again, so now we're sort of tracking in dollars where we're buying locally, and this is the sort of, the goal is to get our own purchasing to 50%, but that only represents 18 regionally for us. So.
Great, Andy, thanks so much. Thanks to all our presenters. We unfortunately don't have half that time left, but that was super valuable. And I'd love to open it up to the attendees to ask any questions of our presenters or share from their own experiences. Don't forget to unmute yourself if you're going to ask a question.
Hey, this is Mary Fisher at Brandeis.
Mary.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hi. So, question is, what is the reporting like for menus of change and the Cool Food Pledge? What's the lift on doing the reporting there?
So I'm happy to take that. This is Allison, Tjaden from the University of Maryland. So as part of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, so far to date, and Julie, you can jump in if I'm wrong, the collective impact reporting has been voluntary for members. So there's not any, at this point, required reporting to participate in MCURC. It's much more a strategic initiative to advance, healthy and sustainable food. But there was I think a group focus on wanting to make sure that we're also able to measure the impact of that work. But the collective impact reporting, which at this point has been optional, is a little bit difficult to go about doing. It's measuring certain food category purchases from your institution in pounds. So that does require quite a lot of data collection and some expertise from food service staff because as we just heard, it's much easier to measure these things in dollars, but dollars doesn't really give you a good equation to greenhouse gas emissions. So it is important that items are turned into pounds, or if they're liquid, into gallons. The nice thing is that the World Resources Institute is really the research engine behind the collective impact. And so the submissions for the Cool Food Pledge are essentially equivalent to what we submit to the collective impact for MCURC. So for us, it's one type of data collection, and it gets easier each time you do it when you get back, when you figure out exactly how to collect the data and what some of your conversions are.
And just to add, Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, this is David from Harvard, that actually the collective impact for Menus of Change University Research Collaborative really focuses on protein sources, whereas Cool Food Pledge has all of the categories of food.
So the Cool Food Pledge, there are mandatory items and there are optional items. So the mandatory items for the Cool Food Pledge are modeled to mirror the MCURC collective impact. You then have the ability to track more, but fruit and vegetable in particular are really cumbersome to measure in pounds, and so it's not required for the Cool Food Pledge, because it is not, the work to get that done is not worth the % of your GHG emissions from their analysis.
Right.
Great, thanks. We had a question come in through the chat. Caroline's going to read it off.
Caylin McCamp asked, does the Cool Food Pledge require a presidential or a very high-level commitment in order to engage?
I'll just quickly answer from Harvard's perspective. So the reason why we had our executive vice president sign on was because we have multiple food vendors that we will be collecting all of their reporting and putting it forward on representing the whole university. So that's why we had a high-level person. I'm pretty sure they will accept kind of even just an individual food vendor. If you're like a self-op, then it could just be the food vendor. It doesn't need to be a university representative or staff person.
Yeah, I'll jump in with that. Our director of dining signed the Cool Food Pledge with approval from our campus leadership, because we are the primary food service for the campus and are self-operated.
Great. Any other questions? All right, we have one coming in. Andy, go ahead. You want to ask it?
Yeah, sure. I'll unmute. I just put it in the chat. But I had students coming asking for data specifically for CMAP, which is a collaboration between University of Virginia and University of New Hampshire and Second Nature. It's a carbon and nitrogen footprint analysis tool. Wanted like breakdown of food into 28 different types of food categories. And so I did that, and I haven't heard back on whether it was useful, and is anybody else doing this? Is this going to, should I start tracking that?
I just wanted to throw out there, so we also have gotten requests to kind of report into that. And one thing that we're doing is we're working with a data analytics student group to compare the different calculators. So right now, especially because we had this high level support for signing onto the Cool Food Pledge, we've just been using World Resources Institute's protocol and calculator. But we're definitely going to be doing some sensitivity analysis looking at groups like CMAP, because I think it's a little bit more granular in some ways, but that may require a lot more data collection. So it's something we're definitely looking at Harvard for sure.
Great. And do any other attendees have any experience using that platform? I'd like to speak to it.
This is Mary at Brandeis again. We do that. I did it mainly because I wanted to at least have something that measured our food footprint, and we don't do any other kind of, we don't do cool food or anything right now. So it was kind of the easiest access food footprint tool that I had. And it was just different categories. But it doesn't capture a lot of the types of foods that Sodexo serves on our campus. So, there's no category for like egg rolls or whatever they're serving, So, it's fine. I would really be interested in that sensitivity analysis because we obviously there are, a number of different emissions factor estimates for any different type of food. So David, if you're able to share that work after the students are done, I'd be really interested in seeing it.
Yeah, and just to give a reality check, so this is something that we were thinking of doing a sensitivity analysis, but only found the students maybe last week. So this is something that we'll do until the summer or next fall. So I don't want to make any promises, but definitely I can remember to share that with the group, because also if it happens sooner, then I can share that as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Great. I think it's worth noting too that they have the ability to track processed foods down to 3 different ingredients. So you can actually quantify a food by 3 different categories in order of its prevalence in a food.
Hi, this is Caylin McCamp. Can you hear me?
Yes, Caylin, go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm wondering if the carbon analysis event, through whichever outlet is really having an influence on people's climate action plans, targets. Are they offsetting as a result? Just wonder if it's sort of a drop in the bucket. A lot of work for a drop in the bucket is sort of the fear that I have.
Just I can quickly answer from Harvard's perspective. We in our climate action plan, we made a goal to start tracking scope 3 emissions. So emissions from things like air travel, commuting, but food, just a back of the envelope calculation, food looks pretty significant actually. And we are thinking of that as a big part of our strategy in terms of emissions reduction. But at the same time, we're also doing that same analytics team is going to be doing kind of that analysis to figure out whether it is just a drop in the bucket or not, but it's looking like it could be pretty significant in terms of emissions. So it's a big part of our overarching strategy on emissions reduction.
Great. So I'm watching the time here. Any last quick questions? Thank you all for attending. Presenters, thanks so much for your time and sharing your experiences and perspectives. I will be circulating the slide deck and the recording, hoping that it worked. I look forward to continuing the conversation. So thanks everyone so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Right.
Really appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.
Sure. So it is just a drive. Well.